Well, welcome to day 4. Holy cow, it's going fast. Day 4 of Summer Fishtrap's readings and events. So we get to start off today with Sharma, which makes me super happy. It's nice to catch up with you and see you. So Sharma Shields is our featured reader this afternoon, one of 3 today. We have, I'm going to mess this up. I know I'm going to do it. We have Sharma Shields this now at 2 o'clock. Mosley will be doing a craft talk. At 3 o'clock, we'll be back here with Ellen Waterston, and then wrapping the day up with Nina McConnachly. So a full day of readings today. And then again, as we've said, we'll post these as the Wallowa County internet speeds allow. So we will get these up to you as soon as we can. So Sharma, how are you doing? Let's catch up a little bit. You're up in Spokane with, your children were here a second ago, but how's life in Spokane?
It's good. We're, really have nothing too much to complain about. I think there's been a lot of big emotions in my household with everything that's been going on in the world, COVID and the Black Lives Matter uprising, and just, hoping things change for the better. And so, yeah, I think we're here, we're doing okay, and we're feeling a lot of different things, as I'm sure a lot of people are.
It was funny, I was looking at your workshop title today, and I hadn't thought about it for a while, and I'm looking at this Vivid Monsters, Exploring Vulnerabilities, Fear, and Strangeness. That could not have been, it's almost like you could have captioned this whole time about exploring vulnerability, fear, and strangeness. That seems to capture it really well. So, yes. Who knew? Yeah. You came up with that a while ago, so maybe it's you. So.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to introduce Sharma to those of you who haven't had a chance to spend some time with her this week or last summer or in your writing life. Sharma is the author of a short story collection, Favored Monster, and 2 novels, which get all sorts of raves. Everybody loves, somebody was talking about Sasquatch Hunter yesterday, the Sasquatch Hunter's Almanac and the Cassandra. Sharma's short stories and essays have appeared in the New York Times and Electric Lit and Catapult, Slice, Slate, Fairy Tale Review, Kenyon Review, Iowa Fugue Review, Fugue, I mean, all over the place. Basically, if it's a review, Sharma's essays have appeared into it. She received her BA in English and Literature from the University of Washington and her MFA from the University of Montana. She's the founding and managing editor of boutique press Scablands Books and a contributing editor for Moss. Do you still work in independent bookstores? Are the bookstores still going? Yeah.
I do. I work for a very small bookstore, a children's bookstore called Wishing Tree Books here in Spokane.
Wonderful. And you live in Spokane with your photobombing children and your husband, and we are super happy to have you join us. Welcome, Sharma.
Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. I just want to start by saying and acknowledging that I'm on the traditional lands of the Spokane people. They are the region's forever stewards. And I wanted to start with a quote from a really amazing essay that was in the offing by Alyssa Washuta called Apocalypse Logic that I recommend to people. Why I have used Boston in this essay when I am talking about white people, for the white people who have already made up their minds about their own whiteness, for the white people who have forgotten that their whiteness is new here, that whiteness is not a phenotype, but a way of relating. For the white people who don't believe me when I say that the most thorough answer to the question, what can we do, is remove your settler state from this land and restore all governance to its forever stewards. Let's see, and I really want to thank here at Fishtrap, Mike and Shannon and Whitney and Janice, David with Eastern Oregon University, and just the whole group of people that have brought us all together. Because I know what an arduous task this was in this very extraordinary time. And I'm so grateful for it. This has been an absolute joy for me this week and really moving. And so I have my students to thank for that too, who I've loved working with. And I want to thank all of the writers that I'm writing here with. I'm sort of stunned I get to be here with you all. Some of my very favorite writers, Beth and Lainey. Frank's reading was so powerful the other night. Omar's yesterday. I am so moved by everybody. So Grateful to be here. I'm going to be reading a very short story called Residents of the Air, which appeared in Catapult a couple of years ago. So this is Residents of the Air. The summer of the floating houses was the hottest season on record, also the smokiest and the most boring. Before the houses cracked away from their foundations and lifted slowly into the air like clunky square blimps, the children complained endlessly to their respective adults. A wildfire advisory had ordered people indoors, especially the young, the elderly, and the infirm, and almost all of the town's summer camps were canceled. I want to see the mountains, the kids whined. I'm sick of the ash and the sweat. Please let us play in the yard again. When the houses began to groan and quake, some of the adults scolded, "Look what your complaining has done. Even the house is upset with you." It was generally assumed that the Ronalds' house went up first, although as it happened long past midnight, no one noticed it right away, even with the neighborhood dogs barking incredulously at the monstrous shadow lifting into the air. A few hours later, the Ronald family woke up to clear skies and a cool breeze, enjoying the sensation of being rocked gently in a giant cradle. They padded onto their front porch, feet slippered, bodies robed, and stared down in awe at the town far below them. The view had the aspect of a mirage, shimmering beneath the russet haze of smoke as though submerged in water. As other houses lifted to join them like balloons released one after another during a parade, the Ronald children cheered with excitement. When the homes reached a certain height, they settled into a comfortable, serene bob. People worried at first about what would happen when food ran out, but then up went the schools and gas stations and grocery stores and greenhouses and generators and office buildings and water towers. Vehicles and planes rose too, but they didn't stop alongside of the houses. They rose and rose until they disappeared, and the residents assumed they disintegrated in the heat of the atmosphere. The loss of transportation didn't matter. The residents found they could gently steer their homes to any location desired by taking hold of their front door frames and leaning this way or that. When they reached their destination, they leaped gingerly from one stoop to another, feeling a happy little thrill at this ability to walk on air. When the errand or visit was finished, the houses always drifted slowly back to their original places, as if invisible threads connected them to the plots of land far below. The residents of the air relaxed and enjoyed the newfound lightness of their existence. Gone was the boredom and routine of their old lives. Here, in a sky so brilliant blue and clear they couldn't remember the smell of exhaust or of smoke, ailments improved, lungs expanded, wrinkles vanished overnight, cancers and immune disorders disappeared, gray hairs miraculously turned a luxurious chestnut brown. Families and friends met for long, relaxed meals in the floating houses and engaged in lazy, passionate arguments about whether this new experience was a miracle of God or the result of irreversible climate change. Whatever it was, they accepted it cheerfully. The children, too, were overjoyed. They grew brave, leaping from porch to porch, even while parents yelled at them to knock it off. "You'll break your neck, for Christ's sakes." But when young Lily Sanderson slipped and fell feet first off the back deck, she landed on a dense cloud of ash that bounced her right back up to her point of departure and into the arms of her sobbing, frantic mother. When the children discovered this phenomenon, it became a free-for-all, and they treated the sky like an overinflated bounce house, jumping and flipping and shrieking with joy. "It's safer up here than it is down below," the parents noted. "I don't know about you, but I don't miss the earth at all." The residents of the air looked down on the village below with a mixture of pity and derision. Barely visible beneath the belt of heavy smoke, a few dozen houses remained locked to the earth, and it felt to the residents of the air like a death sentence. Those poor people, they thought. What's wrong with them that their houses don't rise too? A good mile below, hooked to the earth, Naya wondered the same thing. The smoke in the air was so thick that she woke up repeatedly at night to stalk the premises, worried that her own house was on fire. The children coughed and spluttered and stopped asking to go outside. They hung crookedly in front of the television set like clothes pinned to a wire. Naya couldn't see the houses overhead, obscured as they were in the ether, She only sensed their presence the way she sensed heaven and hell, uncertainly, arcanely, with irritation, and all around her were the skeletal foundations where her neighbors' homes had been. Now and again, her tedious friend Sue phoned to tell her how glorious the air was up above, asking when she planned to join them. As though Naya had any say in the matter, as though any of them did. Naya, look, just think good, happy thoughts, Sue told her one afternoon, sounding exasperated. A little positivity can go a long way. Naya's first thought was, fuck off, Sue. But by this point, Naya was growing desperate, and it occurred to her that this was yet another link in a long chain of negative thinking. Maybe you're right, she said. I need a mantra or something. Reach for the stars, Sue said cheerfully. The universe has no use for a Debbie Downer. Naya had never seen herself as a Debbie Downer, more of a cautious pragmatist, but she thanked Sue anyway, and they said their farewells. For a moment, Naya was glad her phone's battery was almost dead, but then she thought about her husband and felt a rising panic. She went and found the kids gathered together again on the sofa, sitting in front of the silent television. Reach for the stars, she told them. One of them groaned. Their eyes bored into the screen, which was as black and blank as a gun, the electricity to the house having been severed 2 days ago. The kids stared at it now anyway, out of habit, Naya guessed, or maybe as an act of revolt. For a moment, she stood watching the three children, love flooding her veins so full that her limbs ached with it, and she felt keenly that she'd failed them. Then a darker, meaner thought occurred to her. Maybe it's their fault. Maybe they're the reason we can't rise. And just like that, a fresh blanket of guilt dropped over her shoulders, adding to all of the other blankets of guilt she ferried there. Guilt quilts, Naya had once joked to herself. And she knew that this was why she was always sort of slow and sort of sweaty, because of this heavy weight she dragged around with her everywhere, this gathering collection of all of her failures, however small, as a mother, as a woman, as a human being. She even felt guilt for allowing herself to feel such guilt. I know all of this has been difficult, she started philosophically. Then she noticed how closely they watched the black mirror of the television screen, and it freaked her out, the mock concentration on their faces, and she interrupted her speech to clap her hands and tell them in her sharpest, mommiest tone, okay, that's enough, you zombies. Let's go do something productive. Their eyes peeled away from the screen and landed on her like large, angry crows. Go make a painting, she said at a loss. We're out of paint, the youngest Cora said. Use your markers, use spit, be creative. She tried not to think about how foolish it was to encourage creativity in the world as it was now, sepia-tinted, reeking of burnt flesh. The kids, shoulders drooping in various postures of resignation, rose from the sofa in a tangle of elbows, knees, and gawky, slender limbs, and reassembled themselves for an uneven march to the kitchen. I'm sorry we're stuck here, Naya called as the kitchen door swung closed behind them. If I could fix it, I would. She thought about driving away with them all, trying to make it to the ocean maybe, or to Canada, but the dumb car had floated into the air a week ago now. Walking or hiking out was impossible too. With the news outlets shuttered, there was no idea where exactly the wildfires began and ended. They seemed to be all around them. Knowing her luck, she would lead the children right into the gut of the flames. When is Dad coming home? She heard Nathan, her oldest, say. I miss Dad, Cora wailed. We'll see him soon, said Reggie, her middle child, always the only optimist of the three, the least whiny, but the doubt in her voice was palpable. Naya picked absently at a bump on her ear, heart sinking. Their dad, Lane, had gone up into the sky in an office building, the whole of it lifting into the air like a slow-moving rocket. Her own place of work, a day spa called Serenity, had also risen, without her, but she was glad of it. She was tired of the job, the thankless drudgery and the demanding clientele. It would have been a nightmare to be stuck there without the children. Her husband texted regularly to tell her that all was well. At least he was getting a lot of overtime pay, although people were messier up there, more careless, and water was rationed, caught in buckets and water towers during the 1 hour each day when it rained. The rationing meant his job was messier than ever. In the evenings, he phoned and spoke to the kids, all of their voices lowered by the weight of his absence, though he made every attempt to sound hopeful. She knew he hated being away from them, but she resented him for it still. I'm not sure how to get down, Lane had told her during one of their recent calls. You're going to have to come up here. Aye, aye, Captain, she'd said irritably. When you figure out how to do that, let me know. He hadn't replied, but she suspected he shared Sue's belief that the house's refusal to lift was somehow her fault. It's not. What? It's not my fault, she'd said, voice trembling. I didn't say that, Lane said. Look, I love you, Naya. No one's blaming you. Don't get paranoid, okay? You always get paranoid when things get tough. We're on the same team, remember? You're all floating around in the sky like there's not a crisis down here. We can hardly breathe. I'm not celebrating, Lane said. I'm working. At night, I'm sleeping on a recliner in the staff room. My back is killing me, and I miss you and the kids. Naya drew in a breath. She thought of her husband's big arms around her, his warm brown eyes, the way they crinkled when the kids said something sweet or surprising. I know, she said. I'm sorry. Let's just hope something changes soon. Either you rise or we fall. This had choked her with a new fear. Don't fall, she'd commanded. I'll figure out something. Now she peeked in on the children. They spread papers around on the kitchen table, passing out markers and crayons. Someone had found a box of cookies and they nibbled on these secretively, as though afraid she'd take them away, as if she'd ever take away anything now that brought them such joy. Naya half smiled. I'm gonna take a walk, she told the kids. Mom, you can't, Cora said. The air is hazardous, numbskull, Nathan muttered. Naya gave Nathan a look and he apologized. Just around the block, Naya said. I'll be fine. I'll hold a t-shirt up against my face or something. But she didn't. She went outside empty-handed, the ash falling in thin white threads all around her, and she began to walk. Only she didn't turn around at the block's end. She kept going, all the way down the empty road to the river, passing bare foundation after bare foundation, and the sight of all of those hollow concrete bones suggested that for every miracle, there was an equal and opposite misfortune. About every dozen plots or so, there was a house like hers stuck to the earth, quiet and waiting. A woman stood at the window of one of these homes, staring back at her. Naya lifted her hand in greeting, and the woman did the same, her face expressionless. Naya shuddered. The woman was like a ghost, a copy of her own purgatorial self. Less than a mile later, at the river's edge, Naya sat down on a boulder and breathed in deeply the sulfurous air. The sun was a faint pink disk in a yellow sky. High above her, she sensed the dark underbellies of the houses, as gloomy as her thoughts. The forest across the water was preternaturally quiet, but now and again the breeze picked up and rasped through the trees, the leaves so dry they crackled and splintered. The river itself was low and lazy, burbling along almost noiselessly with a thin frost of ash lacing its edges. Naya noticed a line of movement slinking across the ground from the trees, and she rose from her perch on the boulder's edge and peered hard. A giant organism crawled, belly against the earthen floor, away from the forest toward the water. No, she realized, not one organism, but several, moving in tandem. Invertebrates, thousands of them, spiders, ants, aphids, centipedes, millipedes, woodlice, earthworms, pillbugs, all of them creeping toward the cooler stones of the river's edge, where many would fall in the water and drown. Naya spent a full minute marveling at the sight of this phenomenon, wondering at its origins, when it dawned on her, the fire, it's here. It was barreling toward them. These miniature creatures with their lint-sized, hyper-aware brains sensed it and fled. Naya wondered how easily it would be for the fire to leap the river. Oh, sorry. Gotta find my last page. Here it is. Naya wondered how easily it would be for the fire to leap the river. The fire stations, trucks, helicopters, and all had floated away, leaving no one to defend the town from the flames. Naya turned and sprinted, gasping and coughing, for home. The other mothers in the remaining houses noticed her running past and threw open their windows, their doors, crying out for Naya to stop, explain herself. They exploded from their dwellings, shouting, and unfolded alongside of her like paper dolls, fragile and identical in their terror, loping in step with her, but there was no time to explain. Only run, the fire's here. Get your kids, save yourselves. It shocked Naya, the sight of all of these women. Look at how many of us are left behind. The residents of the air saw nothing. The smoke was so opaque now that it completely obscured any view of the little town. I wonder how they're faring, the residents murmured. Surely they've escaped by now. They reassured one another, breathing in the good crisp air, marveling over the strength and health of their limber children who bounced through the sky now like trapeze artists, little plump gods all their own. Their homes rose higher every day. The sun glowed stronger, the stars shone brighter, the constellations rearranged themselves into figures of hope and reason. From up here, everything felt new and undiscovered. Still, there was no pleasing everyone. Now and again, someone complained of motion sickness, and there was, of course, a great longing for pets, friends, or family members abandoned in the world below. A janitor attempted to parachute down to the village, desperate to find his wife and children, but he bounced right back up to where he'd started. Some of the residents had grown uncomfortable watching him. He'd wept and cried out and begged for help, but what could they do? They were here now, and they were grateful. It's best to forget about them. They can take care of themselves, out of sight, out of mind. Up here, the air was fresh, and everyone had everything they needed, and few people worried about the precariousness of the situation, perched as the houses were on a mile of nothingness. The key was to keep your gaze steady, to make sure to look straight ahead, or to look up, or to shut your eyes, to do everything, anything, but look down. That's the end.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I am kind of speechless. Where did this come from? Before you answer, think about that for a second. Just a reminder, if anybody has questions, please type them in the box and we'll make sure Sharma gets a chance to answer this. You're getting all sorts of raves and applauses, which you deserve. So yeah, where did this come from? What the idea of up in the air?
Well, weirdly, I was given a prompt by Humanities Washington. They do a big fundraiser every year, one in Seattle and one in Spokane. And they always have a theme that the writers write on. And so the theme for that year was, I think, Beacon in the Night, which made me think of lighthouses. And then I think, thinking about the idea of lighthouses, I thought of houses that were light, that actually floated into the sky. And so that's really, I think, where the whole idea started. And so I wrote that first section about these houses kind of rising up. We were in the middle of a very brutal fire season here. This was a couple years ago, where a lot of the descriptions that I have of the going on a walk and the thin threads of ash falling from the sky, that was all happening here at that time. So I had that in the story starting out too.
There was a question that was asked yesterday at Omar's reading about world building. And I think this would apply to this too. How do you go about creating that kind of, what's your process for creating the world that you're writing in, for creating that experience?
Well, I think it's very important to be direct without explaining too much. If you get too much into trying to do some elaborate scientific explanation for how it's possible that these houses have risen, that ends up distracting from the story. So I think by being direct about it and being immediate with it, like, here's the story's weirdness, you're gonna have to buy into it right away. And I'm gonna be upfront about that weirdness right away. People understand immediately, oh, this is the world I'm entering as a reader. And they'll stick with you throughout the story, hopefully, if you execute it really firmly.
Do you have an explanation for the rising homes?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, a scientific one.
I just wondered if, in your own way, in your world, did you invite me for a reason?
No, they went up into the air through sheer imagination alone. I think.
Imagination.
Yeah.
Do you see where this may go? Do you have an and then, or is this just a nugget for you?
This piece in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, this feels like a finished short story to me, with a beginning, a middle, and an end somewhat open-ended, I suppose, because it's not exactly a happy ending. I think there's a sense of foreboding in this story, a sense of the privilege of these people that are in the air and the dire situation below, and the neglect happening, and all of that too, but which I think is metaphorical.
Absolutely.
And I love writing in metaphor, but I haven't thought about expanding this into anything longer or anything like that. It's definitely, I think, a piece that's finished. I have a short story collection that this is included in, that's with my agent, but she doesn't want to try to sell a short story collection until I have another novel written, which is kind of interesting. So
that doesn't seem fair.
Well, nobody wants to buy a short story collection.
Nobody wants to do it. Yeah. So a couple questions here. Kyle wanted to know if you wrote anything else with as much upfront weirdness as this one.
Yes, I would say almost all of my short stories have some sort of weirdness like this. My very first collection, which was published by a very small press out of Pittsburgh called Autumn House, is called Favorite Monster. And I think the first story in it starts with, we were all surprised when Brian hired the Cyclops. And there's several other stories that introduce Medusa right away, or introduce strange happenings, and all of them kind of do what I was talking about, where the weirdness is really immediate. I do have some stories where the weirdness is kind of eased into a little bit, and I think there are ways to do that as well. But yeah, most of my stories, I would say, even my novel, I think the Sasquatch appears on page 3 of the Sasquatch Hunter's Almanac. The Cassandra, the narrator of it, Mildred Groves, that's my second novel, the Cassandra, she starts speaking almost immediately to this clairvoyance that she has, her ability to see the future. So there's always these kind of bizarre elements in my work, right from the get-go.
Mal has asked if you could talk more about using extended metaphors. How do you know when something's working and when do you let it go?
Well, I think with metaphors, what I do love about them, and I'm not sure how other writers feel about this, I don't like to define the metaphor too much. It's hard for me to say, this specific metaphor is about this incident specifically in our time or something. I do like to leave a lot open to the interpretation of the reader. And I like to leave space in my writing for people to go in and kind of work out some of the meaning for themselves. And it's been interesting to me to go in and talk with book clubs about my writing and some of their responses, and how varied some of their interpretations of the metaphors can be. There are definitely stories I write that are failures. And I think even a story I write that could be a success for one person might be seen as a failure by another. And I never quite, being a person that never fully trusts myself in any way, really, or that always is a person that always enjoys in a way questioning myself. I think those are, questions I'm always wondering, like, is this story successful at this metaphor? I think I was having this question of it kind of reading it right now. So I'm, in some ways, I don't know if I'll ever fully know if something is successful or not. The story saw success. It got published in Catapult. The people at Bedtime Stories seem to love it. And I feel pretty good about it. But I never feel so strong about my work that I'm like, wow, I did this 100% right. There's always a little bit of doubt in there for me.
I'm going to follow on the metaphor thing. Beatrice said there's a parable-like quality to the story. Can you speak to the ways your work draws from the forms or content of folklore, which I know you do, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I love. I love fairy tales. I love Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. I love mythology. Those were things I read quite a lot of when I was young, and they're also things that I've been reading aloud quite a bit to my children, among other items too. But and I sometimes have thought that a lot of the kind of almost detached narrative that occurs with fairy tale. There's a really great essay for people who enjoy writing and reading fairy tales by a writer named Kate Bernheimer, who runs the Fairy Tale Review. And she has this great essay called Fairy Tale is, oh, now I can't remember the title. I'll find the essay and I'll link to it. It's like Fairy Tale is Form, Form is Fairy Tale, I think is the title. It was in Tin House a few years ago. And I think about that essay quite a bit. It's really fascinating. But that sort of detached narrative that can occur in fairy tales, I really find myself drawn to that again. And I wonder if it's because I've been revisiting them and reading them to my children. And they're such interesting vehicles of fear and vulnerability, reading fairy tales, and also kind of bravery and strength in a strange way. So we've been talking about fear and vulnerability quite a bit in my workshop this week, and maybe I think tomorrow we touch a little bit on some sort of fairy tale aspects. But so I'm kind of rambling, so I'll stop there.
No, it's good. I think you're giving exactly what everybody wants. So Victoria asked, were you aware of the rapture resonance?
Where are the rapture residents?
Aware of the rapture, the resonance with the rapture, the rising.
Oh, yeah. Somebody else mentioned that about the story too, that I hadn't thought about, the idea of the rapture and being like the good people being taken away, But it was funny because when I was writing it, I hadn't thought of that while I was writing it, but I definitely could see that being plucked as a string in a reader's brain for sure.
There was another one that says from Jane. She said that I was wondering if the metaphorical resonance with imperialism was deliberate, and also if the ones who walk away, I'm going to say this wrong, from Elmelis had any connection.
It's so great that you say that. The Ursula K. Le Guin story she mentions is one I taught last year, because that's such a profound story and so ethical, really ethically profound. And I love it for that reason. And I think definitely that had something to do with this story, that I was thinking about that at the time. I think I was also thinking of things like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, and definitely imperialism. I think one thing I revisit quite a lot, that I'm writing about now in my new novel, is definitely a criticism of capitalism, which of course I think is in part related to imperialism too, and the ways in which capitalism can be so harmful to our populace. So yes, for sure. I think that's really intelligent commentary there. Great questions, everybody. Thank you for this.
Absolutely. By the way, there's about a half dozen. I would buy your short story collection in here, so you've got some pre-sold. So
that's awesome. Nobody's ever bought it, I don't think. This will be great. Thank you.
I've been asking, just kind of a closing question here. I've been trying to remember to ask people, because I'm super curious myself, about these times that we're in, and dealing with our changing daily routines, and also just the level of noise and fear and vulnerability and terror that's circling us. How has that impacted your writing practice, your routine, your habit?
Well, I've been pretty frank with my students that I've had a pretty hard time writing these last few months. That started mainly because my kids' school, of course, was shut down. So I think, like a lot of parents, I've taken on the burden of also being a sort of stand-in teacher for the kids, and also like emotional support, which is what I should always be as a mother. But I think losing some of that alone time that I had for my writing schedule really knocked me off balance, and I haven't been able to get back on track. I'm actually thinking that Fishtrap might really inspire me again. It's just been so inspiring to engage in really intellectual conversations about writing again, and the power of story and narrative, which these are my life's loves, and getting to talk with other people where this is their life's loves too. That's really inspiring. And kind of remembering to have courage again, which is the whole Fishtrap theme, because I haven't felt that. But, I was thinking yesterday I should stop being so hard on myself, because the truth is I have been writing. I've been writing a lot of letters to council members and to the mayor and to over a lot of issues that are happening in Spokane, where I think real profound change can happen with state violence and other issues, and also supporting groups locally and nationally. So there's good work being done. It's not on my novel right now, but the novel will still be there. And I think these kinds of, as everybody here can probably relate to, I think these dips and valleys occur all the time with our writing. And I'm in a bit of, or dips and valleys, that makes it sound like it's all downhill, but like the summits and valleys, I guess.
You're just running into some questionable people,
It does feel like dip valley right now, all downhill. But there will be a summit again, and more creative effort toward that end. I haven't had the energy for it right now. And but anyway, kind of a long rambling answer, but that's kind of how I have been feeling lately. It's been tough, but I think it's great for people to know that even after you have an established writing career, you will still run up against times where you utterly doubt yourself, you're utterly stopped, and that is normal. And hopefully I can remember not to despair over that, but to know that this will pass. This stasis I'm in with the writing will pass. It will, I hope. So we had a writer yesterday say in our class, and I appreciated it so much. He said, "I am an excellent writer." And I hope everybody can say that aloud and really mean it in this wonderful way for themselves, because it was said in a way that was so kind to oneself and so true, and heard, like he heard himself say it. And I was so moved by that, because I haven't been able to say that to myself lately. And I hope everybody else can say that. And I want to thank Sam for saying that in our class, because that was
Sam. Yeah.
A profound comment. And just to hear it said so beautifully like that. So
yes. Well, you are an excellent writer, as is everybody who's listening. So thank you again for taking the time. Fred has said its time is up. So I do want to remind everybody at 2:00, Mosley will be doing his craft talk, which I expect will be excellent, because he too is an excellent writer. This will be a good segue. At 2:00 will be, I'm going to check this again because I'm going to get it wrong. 2:00 or 3:00, I'm sorry, will be back here with Ellen Waterston, and at 4 with Nina. And then 5:00 today is our first social hour. So if you want to stop by in the, I'm going to get this wrong, but it'll be repeated right. I think it's in the Connect lounge tonight, and or this evening, and just come in and check in and talk with folks. And thank you again. So, and also, because I do know this, because I've done it, I bought my very own copy of the Cassandra last year from the Book Loft, and I know they have many copies available as well as Sharma's other books. So if you want to order a copy of one of Sharma's books or any of our other Summer Fishtrap faculty signed, go ahead and do that. So thank you again, and we'll see you guys all in a little bit.